There are no shortcuts to getting highly coveted press coverage for your brand, only smart cuts like the DIY PR project. Learn how to grow your brand's credibility with PR on a budget with me by your side. This program is your all in one membership with expert training, customizable templates, and a supportive community to cheer you on every step of the way. Our Q1 cohort kicks off January 29th, so don't wait. Join us and start growing your business with free publicity today. Sign up now at diy-pr.com. Welcome back to Grow Your Wealth. I'm your host, Reena Goodwin, and I could not be more excited about today's episode. We have a truly inspiring guest joining us, Suzy Benson. Suzy is a coach, speaker, and certified Dare to Lead facilitator who has dedicated her career to helping people become better leaders and create happier, healthier lives. In this episode, Suzy and I explore the power of emotional intelligence, the importance of curiosity in navigating workplace conflict, and how setting boundaries can transform both personal and professional relationships. We also dive into the challenges of people pleasing and how shame can impact our ability to lead effectively. Suzy brings her wisdom, influenced by the teachings of Brené Brown, to emphasize why leaders must validate emotions and foster psychologically safe work environments. If you've ever struggled with saying no, felt the pull of perfectionism, or wondered how balance, if you've ever struggled with saying no, felt the pull of perfectionism, or wondered how to balance courage with comfort in leadership, this conversation will speak directly to you. Get ready to take notes because Suzy's insights will leave you feeling equipped to make some meaningful changes in your business. Let's dive in. Suzy Benson, it is so good to see you. How are you today?
Well, if I'm checking in with my emotions, which I always made you do when we worked together, I think I am feeling fatigued and excited at the same time.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, I'm glad that we could offset some of that fatigue with the excitement. I feel like I owe you so many, right? But yes, we've worked together before, and I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. Suzy, you are someone that I've reached out to, over the last on and off over the last couple of years when in my business, right? As a business owner, we all have those moments of anxiety, stress, relationship issues, boundaries issues. We're going to cover all of that and more today. But before we dive in, can you share a little bit of background on who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Yeah, so my elevator pitch, but I'll try to make it less elevator pitchy and just be me. So I am Suzy Benson. I live in Seattle, Washington, and my background is in education. So once upon a time, I was a good little Mormon housewife. I don't know if you knew that.
Mhm.
And as good Mormon housewives do, we have lots of babies, which I succeeded at. I have 5 children. And part of my life experience was have a job that you can stay home with your kids. And so I was a teacher for a long time so that I could also be at home with my kids during the summer. And I'm still a good little mom, I hope, but I'm not the Mormon mom anymore. Just throwing that in there. But that's what we did when I was Mormon. We had lots of babies, and we all were teachers. And so my background is really, from an education standpoint, teaching children. And then I shifted after 25 years of marriage. I landed in a position where I was divorced and I needed to reinvent myself. And this natural fit of coaching and adult education, because of my background in teaching social and emotional learning really to children, seemed like a great transition. And I had some experience in the business world because I started a nonprofit organization in 2008, and it's called African Promise Foundation. And we work with women supporting their business efforts, and then we provide school fees for disadvantaged children. And so I had that business perspective, and then I merged it with the coaching perspective when I did this great, massive reinvention about 8 years ago, where I officially became a certified coach. And also continued my work in Africa. So that's why I'm a little fatigued, is suffering from the jet lag right
Not
now.
the 5 kids?
No, no, now I have 2 grandbabies, so it's a lot. So,
Stop. You
yeah,
do
and
not have
yeah,
2 grandbabies. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, congratulations.
thank you. So, yeah, that's the authentic me. That's definitely not the elevator pitch, and I prefer it that way.
That is incredible. I don't think I knew that you had 5 children as well too. You're something else. That's
Thank
amazing.
you.
Well, one of the things that really drew me to you, because I reached out to you before I'd ever gotten to know you and said I wanted to work with you, Suzy, is that you trained under Dr. Brené Brown and you were a certified Dare to Lead facilitator for 4 years, which is so, so amazing. And I can say personally that has totally come out in our work together. I'd love to know, in your experience, what was that like? And how has that really influenced your personal coaching approach?
Yeah, I feel like Brene has, and I don't mean this lightly, it sounds funny, but I think she's saved a lot of people's lives. And I'm one of those like beneficiaries because I was going through a very traumatic divorce and disassembling of my family when I was lucky enough to train. I was in her first cohort for her Dare to Lead facilitators, and I had read all of the books. I was in the Rising Strong process when I met her, and so it was not just me there learning to help others, but it really was part of that saving of myself. Because if I couldn't learn, to be vulnerable, to recognize my shame, to be a better communicator, to rise strong, if I wasn't living my values, how could I then like bring that to you, right? As we even worked together, some of those things showed up. And so I feel like Brene is embedded into my DNA at this point because sometimes I can't even remember, am I quoting Brene or are those my words? Because so many of the things that are in my soul are her words. And so um it was one of the greatest gifts, and it has really shaped me as a, now officially the last 7 years, a professional coach.
That's amazing. One of the things that I really have taken away from our coaching together, it is, I call it a Suzyism, but I guess it's also a Brenéism as well too, is this idea of getting curious. And I know that for so many of us, business owners, entrepreneurs, busy professionals, right? We're always like so go, go, go. And there's something about curiosity that makes us slow
Mhm.
down, right? And really start to look inward in order to look outward, and kind of um, work that into our people relations. Do you remember chatting with me about that, like
Yeah.
getting curious in work? What does that mean for those that aren't really familiar with that
Oh,
Suzy slash Brenéism?
uh, well, it's funny because even today, like as you were saying those words out loud, I had a moment where I was triggered. And even before we started the podcast, my stomach was still a little bit upset and my chest was tight. And even as you use those words back on me, my first thought is, oh, I should have gotten curious. Like, why was that? Not why, but what was it in me that got pushed? And so that's what it means to me is, when something is not going well, or you're in conflict, or you're feeling triggered, get curious. And we're going to hopefully talk a little bit about the stories we're making up, but those are the things that I think, if we could all get curious, when a coworker or a partner, when something in your body is like, getting triggered, what's showing up for me, it becomes so much easier to deal with versus now I'm just on my end and you're on your end and we're fighting each other. It's like, what's going on in me? What is that button that's being pushed? Huh. For me, it was my fear of being controlled button. And I just figured that out with you. So thank you.
Oh my God, did I just coach a little bit? That's so cool.
How much do I owe you?
Anytime, anytime. Well, you need PR? That's the only thing I'm good at. So, but that's such a good point. I feel like, and I've certainly found myself in that position as well, and it's something that I've even bestowed upon my own team as well too. Right, like this notion of getting curious. So, in addition to like, maybe in your case, Suzy, like whether it was receiving an email, you noticed that you had a triggering word and therefore it gave you a reaction of some kind. What are some other ways that you would kind of coach your clients about getting curious, like in the workplace, conflict, boundary setting? What are some
Yeah.
of those looking like these days?
Well, I think it all starts with emotional awareness. And it's
Mm.
just so ironic that we're going through this because I can see an hour earlier into my life now and saying, I missed this step. So before I got curious, I should have recognized my emotions. And so I think this is where in the workplace and at home, this emotional literacy, something is going on inside of me. I'm having a reaction, and what what are maybe one or two words that describe how you're feeling in that moment? And okay, so I'm feeling, let's just say I'm feeling afraid. Then we can get curious, but we have to, we call it in coaching, and maybe I've said this with you, name it to tame it. We have to name it. So, and we know that our amygdala, which is the part of the brain that gets hijacked and it gets triggered, it's responsible for the flight, fight, freeze. When we name our emotions, whether we write it down or we say it out loud, we actually can move it quicker to our prefrontal cortex so that our thinking brain actually comes back online and we can respond versus react to situations.
Oh, I love that, respond versus react to
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah.
And
I reacted an hour ago. I'm like, I've got an apology to make to my partner when we're done.
like I was on this great podcast that was
I'm
about.
taking airs my way.
I totally recognize that, and I think that in today's world, I think that that is such a great reminder for all of us, right? Is to slow down and exactly as you said, just to repeat, make sure I got that right. Like name our emotions so that
Yeah.
we can slow down and move it from one part of our brain to the other to be able to appropriately respond versus react, which I can only imagine, speaking for myself, that this is really a practice too, because for
Yeah.
so many entrepreneurs, especially, right? Like my job is like chief firefighter, right? It's just like one fire after the other, just put it out, put it out, put it out. And sometimes it can be hard. I mean, yourself included, right? You're a professional at this to just take that time and pause and really, kind of think things through. Yet we're always challenged as well to be, quick decision makers. I mean, do you think curiosity is a muscle that you can kind of strengthen over time?
I absolutely do. And because you said that, I have a chart. Well, I can't find it. It's sitting right here, somewhere under a pile of papers with all of the emotion words that, well, they're not all of them. It's a massive chart. And I actually keep that. I've been traveling, so it's buried, but normally it's right here because it is this muscle that I'm constantly like, I need a reminder if I'm in a meeting and then I'm getting triggered. I've got my emotions chart here. And so I'm stretching that muscle. Um, I'm not sure if you've heard this before, but Daniel Goleman, the founder of emotional intelligence, talks about the foundational skill of emotional intelligence is this emotional awareness. So for me, this muscle of building the like, how am I feeling? And then that second piece of that muscle, okay, now let's get curious. It is a practice. And I tell my clients this all the time when they get down on themselves or like even me, I could be feeling shame on how I reacted with my partner an hour ago. Or I can say, okay, like I'm aware of this. Good job. Now I can go and make it right versus going into a shame spiral. If I suck, I totally missed the opportunity to be curious about him and about myself. So I remind my clients all the time, even me, who I teach this for a living, I screw it up every day. So it's like, it's a practice.
It is absolutely a practice. I wonder too, Suzy, what your thoughts are on this next question I'm about to ask you. You had just mentioned like you had an episode with your partner, and after this call, you'll be meeting with them to chat with them about it. Is there a reason that you're addressing this quickly, right? Like not letting things kind of simmer, so to speak. Like for those of
Mhm.
us that might have conflict or difficult conversations at work, is there like a guiding principle that you feel like is fair to yourself, but also fair to that other person too?
Yeah. Well, we know a couple of things. When we're triggered is never a good time to try to fix and repair. You know, the Gottmans talk about repair. So
Mm,
when we have some kind of fissure in the relationship, when one or both parties are still triggered, not a good time. So we actually, and this is my fiance, so it's not a work partner, it's my partner. So we both recognized that we were triggered, and we actually called a break. We called a timeout. And so I think whether it's at work or at home, if you recognize that the person you're talking to is triggered or you're triggered, um, take a break. And one thing that I always say is if you take a break, you have to make sure you reassure the person that you're coming back.
mm,
Because if you've got someone with an anxious attachment, so if you, Rena, are and I are coworkers and we're having a moment, I might recognize like I'm not regulated. So I might say to you, like, hey, I'm having a moment. We're not communicating clearly. I'd like to take, a 1 hour pause on this. Uh, I'm not mad at you, Rena. Like, this is about me. I'm having a reaction. Can I come back in 1 hour? And so actually that's a boundary too, right? In a way, where even though, we're not directly talking about that, it does kind of set a boundary. Like I need a break.
mm,
And for those who are anxious, I like to throw in there. So for my partner, he threw in I still love you. We're still good. It's just like managing the holidays, blending families is hard, right? Like, um, and can we come back later? And actually, I think I set a boundary too. It was about a quarter to when you and I were going to meet. And I said, this is too much for me right now. I need to prepare
mm.
myself mentally. I need to take a break. So,
Ooh, that's so good, right? Like making note for the other person. Honestly, I think that's just a kind thing to do, right? Whether you're anxious or not, is to address the elephant in the room, right? Like, are
yeah.
you mad at me? Are we okay? And acknowledging that this might be okay, but in order to take the next step and kind of mend this, it's okay to take a break. Just make
Yeah.
sure to note, I'm coming back
Mhm.
in the
And it's okay
meantime.
to be mad.
Yeah.
With my partner, when we were kind of joking after I called the timeout, I just said, and I just need to let you know, I'm really, really mad at you. And it's okay for somebody to be mad at us. It
Mm.
doesn't define the relationship. It doesn't make us a bad person, but we so quickly go into shame that we can't handle when somebody's disappointed with us in us, frustrated with us. So I think we really need to get better. Like it is not my job to keep you from feeling a negative feeling.
Oh, I remember that from our coaching session too. Let's say that again. It is not my job to keep you from feeling a negative feeling. I've heard that one before too. I remember, I think it was from a therapist long ago who said something very similar, right? Like it's not my, it's or no, here's what she said. I apologize. She said that it's okay to disappoint people, like in terms of like people can handle it, right? We can't, and when we are running a business or a department or a family or whatever that looks like, I think so many of us are so afraid of disappointing people because we want to be liked. We are in a position where we're steering the ship, we're holding things together, and if we disappoint people, then we're looked down upon, and that's a serious boundary crossing action, right? Boundaries are. I think, going to be an important topic that we touch on today because in order to have a thriving business and, a thriving business leader at the top, boundaries are essential, would you say?
1,000%. Yeah. And if we don't touch on this now, remind me later because it was a thought I had. Uh, a boundary without consequences isn't a boundary. So we should, if we have time, let's touch on that later. But I'd love to, if you're okay with it, to talk about what I call like my own definition of what a boundary is. If somebody said, what are boundaries? It's a buzzword, like all the teens are saying it, right? Like, I remember my teen used to say, I'm so triggered. And I'm like, gosh, that word is so overused. And I feel like boundaries is starting to get overused. So let's define what that is. Um, and Brené Brown, she defines boundaries is letting someone know what's okay and what's not okay. And then I think of boundaries also like in organizational situations. It might be setting a boundary around your time, um, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that. But um, for instance, if you're my colleague and we have a frustrating experience between us, and I don't like the way you treated me, rather than just telling you, Rena, it's not okay to talk to me like that, I might say what is okay. It is okay for you to feel frustrated, but it's not okay for you to yell at me or use, curse words. So I like that because a boundary, we can set the boundary, but sometimes we need to tell people what is okay.
That makes a lot of sense. Have you heard of the set method by chance? I'm not sure if
That,
that's something that you've come across, but it reminds me of the set method in communication. So, back in good old PR school, but sort of, I don't want to say soften the reaction or what have
mm,
you, because I think it's just more the approach of just being empathetic and human and recognizing that in many ways we have to meet our colleagues where they are at, right? Like in your case, mentioning that somebody is frustrated, you just named that emotion, right? Like it sounds like you're frustrated and that's okay. However, it's not okay to yell at me, etc. I mean, I think all of these things are already starting to come into play where, we're getting curious, we're labeling certain emotions, and then we're responding to them while also setting a boundary by expressing what is okay and what is not okay. I mean, that's just
mhm.
really smart communication, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you added in those steps first of, figuring out what you're feeling, if you're triggered, maybe taking a break, like all of these things. And then when you are grounded, that is the time to set your boundary because that's a responsive action. A reactive one would be like, I'm going to yell back at you. You're cursing at me and yelling at me. Now I'm going to yell back. That's,
Mm.
a boundary is, if you are trying to set a boundary, is not going to be taken well if you're just shouting back. So getting grounded and then figuring out, um, yeah, I love boundaries.
Well, I do want to come back to what you said though about a boundary without consequences
Yeah.
isn't a boundary. So what would you call
Yes.
that?
I would call it a lie. If I give
Mhm.
you a boundary, I've had I don't just help people in work situations. I do I don't like the term life coaching, but it is life coaching.
Mm.
But people who deal with personal things in relationships, addiction issues. And so, I've had clients before who are like, yeah, I'm going to tell my partner that they're not allowed to drink in the house. And I'm like, okay, that's great. So it sounds like you're setting a boundary. What happens if they do, if they cross that boundary? So I really help them get to the consequence will be you need to sleep at your mom's house or whatever that is. And that's just one example, but um, in a work situation, if we take it back to you, Rena, or being abusive to me, I set my boundary. And if this happens again, Rena, I'm going to HR.
Yes, absolutely. So following up with boundaries is so, so important. That's a great question to ask ourselves as well, too, when we are setting boundaries, because I do think you're right, Suzy. It takes one flick of the thumb on Instagram to scroll and see something about setting boundaries, right? I think the algorithm knows me very well. Working on it, universe. But that being said, right, like in terms of setting boundaries, but taking it a step further and really, as they say, enforcing boundaries, what is going to happen? Because I think too, if we don't hold our boundaries to truth, right? That also shows, I mean, on the extreme side of things, right? That we're either being inauthentic or I mean that we're a doormat, right? Like there's nothing worse than having a boundary and then not upholding that boundary. It really reminds me too, speaking of other facets of life, like in sort of life coaching, which work is part of life. So this makes total sense. My own two sweet little girls, we're struggling a little bit at the moment with boundaries, and that me and my husband have not been so great at enforcing them. And kids are smart. They pick up. Like I literally heard my 7-year-old say the other day, she's like, I know you're not going to do that. I was like, oh, she's right. She's right. I have become a total pushover to my child and she's picked up on it, right? Imagine, and she's 7. Imagine, our colleagues, our family members. I mean, like at the time of recording this, we're about to go into the holiday season, right? Like this is a time of a lot of button pushing.
Yeah, and my daughter is a nanny, and I will be with her on FaceTime sometimes, and she'll say to the child, like, if you do that again, we're not going to the park. She's setting a boundary. And then I'm like, you're still going to go to the park because you want to go to the park. Like, you're not going to keep that boundary. So, and kids know you give them a boundary one or two times, and then you don't keep your word, and they will not believe you.
Absolutely. And I think probably a particular struggle speaking for myself, but I'm curious if you have clients like this too that suffer from a disease called people pleasing,
Oh,
where,
God. Yeah.
it's sometimes just to keep the peace or, not upset in my case, like a lot of times clients, right, like
Yeah.
working in service based industries especially, where the product that you sell is essentially you and you want to be good, you want to please the client, but you also need boundaries because you're human and have kids at home that need you. What advice do you have
Yeah.
for people who have these people pleasing tendencies to uphold these boundaries?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you first of all called out. I thought about this ahead of time, like why don't people have good boundaries? So if we can back up there just a little bit, people pleasers, okay, and people pleasing stems from a fear of what? Let's see what you think. What do you think they are afraid of? You may have already said it.
I think they are afraid of honestly being disliked in
Yeah,
some way. It's just like it's a personal thing. It's not on the other person.
that's
Am I
right.
it is right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean that's my opinion. I'm not,
Yeah.
no research on this. Um, but read enough psychology books, right? This fear of being disliked. And I was also thinking too, people who struggle with codependency, um, that is putting their own needs first, they have a very hard time with boundaries. And so I think it goes back to this it's okay to disappoint people. So your clients sometimes will be disappointed if you say, I'm not available after 5 o'clock. They might be disappointed. And you might have a fear of they're going to think I'm not committed to the project. They're right. Those are just fears. Do what we talked about earlier. Get curious. Are these stories I'm making up? Or maybe what's a positive story? Maybe that client is actually going to respect me because I'm putting my child first and they're a parent also. Like there's a lot of other stories. So, um, but I think it really comes back to getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And so I will have clients all the time tell me when I say, "What's your goal?" I want to get comfortable setting boundaries. And I go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. If it's a vulnerable situation, you will never be comfortable." So Brené Brown says, embrace the suck. Just embrace the suck and then get comfortable being uncomfortable. Feel the fear. I think there's the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Right. So you might have a fear setting a boundary with that client that after 5 o'clock, I'm not available. My daughter has a ballet recital.
Mhm.
And you're afraid that this client is X. Get curious, check out the stories. And if that client is disappointed, ask yourself, then what? Am I going to lose the business? No. Are they going to be disappointed? Yeah, they told me they'd be disappointed. Then what? And just play that game out. Then what? Then what? At the end of the day, I like to have these things. Maybe we did this together, the concentric circles, where you put everybody in the middle whose opinion actually matters.
Ooh.
And the next rung of the circles is around that first circle would be the people whose opinions kind of matter. And then that last circle, people, I think your client's opinion at the end of the day, if you're on your deathbed, probably doesn't matter if they dislike you. But how much attention do we pay to that outside circle?
Too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, if you set that boundary that you can't be involved after 5 o'clock and that person's disappointed and you
Mm.
play out, then what, I'm pretty sure that in most circumstances, it's not going to be life altering if they're disappointed.
Absolutely. That reminds me so much of a I can't remember if it was from a book or some quote from Brené Brown as well about dress rehearsing tragedy as well
Oh,
too. And are you familiar with this one? I don't.
no, but I spend my every night about 3 a.m. doing that. So
3 a.m. 3 a.m. dress rehearsing tragedy, right? Like what could go wrong?
yes,
Everything, right?
yes.
How do you balance that? Like as soon as you said and then what and then what? To me that sounded like that 3 a.m. like, hit the panic button, your head is swirling. I mean to me though, as you were talking about it though, it also just felt like by actually, I don't want to call it dress rehearsing tragedy, but you realize like maybe it's not a bad idea to write something down and say, okay, worst case scenario, as we call it, like even in the PR world, like with crisis communications, what is the worst thing that could happen?
Mhm.
Acknowledging that, but also acknowledging that it probably won't happen. And if it did happen, just as you said, it probably won't be life altering, but by acknowledging there could be a plan A and plan B, it kind of helps disarm that
Yes.
anxiety a little bit because you realize like it's going to be okay either
Mhm.
way, right? Because
Yeah.
exactly on that concentric circle, like these are the in this case, this relationship it's not a forever relationship, and on my priority list, it's a good C or D right now, right?
Yes. Yes. And I would add, Brene talks about check out the conspiracies and confabulations. Like
Mhm.
when you're making up these stories that, if let's just go back to the boundary issue. If I place this boundary or I disappoint this client, what are the stories I'm making up? And, and then I like to ask these questions of, so let's say you take it to a then what, your greatest fear, then what, then what? They're going to think I suck. Let's just say it at the bottom of the barrel is they're going to think I'm incompetent and I suck. Then you ask yourself the question, is that true? Are you incompetent? If I look deep at it, no, I'm not incompetent. Um, and another question is like, if it is true, am I incompetent? Is it always true? No, I'm not always incompetent. But you just really start to ask yourselves those questions. Like you play out your biggest fear, get
Mm.
down to what is that underlying thing? They won't like me. Then what? Then what? Or is that true? If it is true, is it always true? And you can really almost talk yourself out of the worst case scenario. Um, but people who are hyper vigilant, like that, like we're the ones who struggle the most with this because we're constantly looking for danger. We're looking for confirmation that we suck or our client doesn't like us, right? So it is a practice and a retraining and creating different neural pathways.
That is so, so interesting. Suzy, that reminds me of something that I saw on your website as well too. You said this word a couple of times, but I want to come back to it if you don't mind, because I think it's relevant here, is the word shame.
Mhm,
And in your team building, you go through an exercise called shame resilience,
mhm.
which to me is just like, I don't know, it feels like a gut punch. What is shame resilience? Or maybe we should label what is shame, first of
Yeah,
all, like really what we're
yeah,
talking about here. And what does it mean to have resilience with
yeah.
shame?
I love that. I love that you started with let's define it. So shame is the intense feeling that we're not enough and or we don't belong. And so many of us, um, and I almost said except narcissists, but actually that's not true. Narcissists have the most shame, actually. That narcissism stems from deep, deep shame. So we all have a little, baggage. We're carrying a backpack of shame. Some of us, when that shame button, it's an emotion, when that emotion gets triggered, we go into a shame spiral. Okay. So resilience would be how can I get like when I recognize that, well, first of all, a lot of us don't even recognize that it's there. So let me go backwards. Start by acknowledging that it's there. So remember I said you feel something in your body, you're triggered. Hmm. Identify shame. I'm feeling like I'm not enough. I feel like I'm not a good partner or I'm not a good boss. Um, and then it's really those tools. Then we can start doing the name it to tame it,
Mm.
taking a break. Taking a break doesn't mean going and ruminating over the situation. It means literally. So before our call, remember, I was a little
Mhm.
triggered. I mentioned I called my daughter because I knew talking to my daughter for 15 minutes would get my mind and my body back. So taking a break, doing something that helps your nervous system calm down. That's a tool. Um, Mindfulness. Kristen Neff, she has the self compassion components, and one of the pieces of that is mindfulness. Recognizing that this is just a moment that I feel like I'm not enough. It's not going to last. I'm going to be okay. I can see the rainbow through the clouds. So there's a bunch of different tools that when I actually teach a class on shame resilience, we do this. And then I ask the clients, pick one or two that you're like going to try, even if it's just naming when you feel shame. Remember how I said it'll move from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex? That's a tool. So that's shame resilience, recognizing it. It's here. I know it's here.
Wow, that is really, really interesting too, especially like in the workplace. I can only imagine, and I mean, again, probably speaking from myself as well, that a lot of people don't even vocalize that out loud. And here
Yeah.
we are, like building team culture around labeling it,
Yeah.
vocalizing it, and then really building a resiliency around that. I can only
Mhm.
imagine how much that really builds trust and understanding between teammates in a professional
Mhm.
environment. Are there certain types of teams or companies or corporations that you would suggest this for? Or is this kind of a game changer for anyone?
It's a game changer for anyone. Um, I will say that unless it may be Brene Brown's team herself, I doubt very many people in a team meeting when somebody has a trigger says, I'm feeling shame.
Mm.
Now, in a perfect world, if it was psychologically safe, that would be awesome. Because if I'm in a meeting and you're like, I don't know why, but something that you just said triggered some shame in me. And then I can have some empathy and compassion for you and go, oh, she's feeling like she's not enough. But in most corporate environments or even work environments, that's not the case. And so I would say something you can do as a leader is if you can help recognize shame in others, others who may not even know they're feeling it, others who've maybe never even talked about shame. They don't know they're feeling it, but you can recognize it. If I'm with you and I give you some feedback and can actually see you going in a shame spiral as your colleague or leader, I can then lead with some compassion and empathy and put myself in your shoes and say, I think Reena's, I bet she's not feeling enough right now. How can I support her?
Mm.
And so you can actually reverse psychology this a little bit and recognizing. So you have a partner, right? You're married. Like watch for that. And with your daughters, right? A 7-year-old feels shame when they get in trouble. You can start to like pull out your own super spidey senses and start to recognize shame in others so that you can actually help train them to be more resilient without, I mean, we're not being manipulative. That's not what I mean, and you can recognize it to help coach them through it, right? So if you're feeling that shame and you're my direct report, I can actually then start coaching you. Hey Reena, I'm noticing as I mentioned this feedback, your body shifted and your facial expression changed. How are you feeling as I shared this feedback with you? You
Getting
see how, like,
curious.
yeah, so that I'm getting you to open up even though you may not have the skills to do that without my coaching.
That is such a smart move, right? Such a smart tip. What a gift for leaders out there, right? Because I think that for so many of us, it's like as you were describing that and getting curious with your direct reports, for example, sometimes it seems like when we open up that conversation, when we are getting curious, that it is I don't know how to describe this, but like an accusation in some ways that, oh, maybe, I noticed this and is it true? But it's true. Like if you are in a position of a leadership, especially if you have a small team like me, I work super closely with my team. And I think I did a little bit of this coaching unknowingly this morning when we had sort of a back and forth with a client. It was all good, but I have like one person on my team that I just know she takes these things a little too personally, right? Like
Mhm.
it's nothing personal, right? I know it's easy for me to say like it's nothing personal, it's business, like these are great lessons, etc. So I sent her a voice memo on Slack. She I could tell she was feeling a little I don't, maybe hurt, but a little bit like wounded. Her ego maybe a little bit wounded, and it was like it's okay, right? I noticed that. I felt a little bit of that too, and try to turn this negative emotion into a positive, not being manipulative, but just trying to offer some support versus, I think I mean even myself, I've been in other positions where maybe a client, the same sort of back and forth would have gotten me reamed by my boss, right? Like versus coming to them by saying like, "Hey, I understand where you're coming from. Let's talk about it and, what this means for you." And her mood shifted. I could tell during the rest of the day. I think just to also have that acknowledgement as well too that, it gets lonely out there sometimes in our
Mhm.
feelings.
Well, and I think what you did, from what it sounds like, is you validated her experience. So you didn't, from what it sounds like, rush in to like make her feel better. You had empathy for her. You know what this is felt feels like. This has happened to you before, and you're just kind of like, I'm going to hang out with you in this yuck. You feel kind of off about this, and it's okay to feel that way. It's really just about validation, and that coaching can help. So often we rush in to make somebody feel better. And I think it starts really with just validating where they're at. You are disappointed, or that was hard to hear from that client. Um, Before we come in and we're like, well, we need to, I mean, Brene talks about silver lining it, which isn't a real thing, but we don't need to put a silver lining on this. Um, we just need to validate that this happened and it kind of sucks and you're feeling off.
Absolutely. Um, so kind of going back to something that you mentioned as well too regarding shame. It's sort of funny that you mentioned that because I feel like we also another kind of buzzword that we also hear a lot is imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
Are they the same thing? Is shame imposter syndrome? Is it different, or what is the difference?
Yeah, I think shame and imposter syndrome must be like cousins or a brother and a sister, right? Most people deal with imposter syndrome. And to me, imposter syndrome is kind of this idea of, oh my gosh, like on the outside, everything looks okay. I'm cool as a cucumber, but they're going to find out. They're going to find out I'm not good enough. They're going to find out I don't belong. And man, did I have a massive dose of imposter syndrome when I did my training with Brené. And I showed up and I was like, I am the least experienced person in the room. And I actually probably was between me and you. I remember I didn't even know what a C suite was. And you know, so I definitely suffered from that. And I think shame can be a driving force of imposter syndrome. So if I were to pick one or the other to start with, I would say the shame resilience will support um, getting out of that imposter syndrome. It's just not true. Like, you know, maybe I am the least experienced person in the room, but it doesn't mean I didn't belong there. Nobody told me I didn't belong there except me.
So good. So, so good. Again, having that awareness, I think, is so key. This has been so, so helpful. And I know that we've talked about boundaries and creating boundaries, enforcing boundaries. We've talked about shame. We've talked about communication, some really, really heavy topics. With the time that we have left, I would also love to leave on a high note as well too, right? When we talk about wellness at work, right?
Mhm.
Taking care of ourselves to take care of each other. What does a healthy workplace look like, right? Like if you
Yeah.
kind of do all the right things, which we know there's no such thing as perfect here, but how do we know we're on the right path?
Yeah. I think if we have signs that people feel psychologically safe, and what I mean by that is vulnerable conversations, hard conversations are rewarded, right? So if I come to you and I give you hard feedback rather than, you know, the leaders or whomever getting defensive, they welcome it and say, thank you for your perspective. I can see that was hard for you, right? To give me this feedback. And so I would say, um, rewarding those kinds of vulnerable behaviors. If somebody sets a boundary, I can't work after 5 o'clock because I pick my child up at daycare. A healthy work culture would be, I respect that. You know, I mean, as long as the person's getting their work done, I don't really care. So, um, and I think also, you know, there's another Brené-ism that is, you know, we need to attend to people's fears and feelings, or we deal with bad behaviors is the second piece of that. And so I would say a healthy work environment is where the leaders are attending to people's fears, their emotions, and all of those things. And instead of, you know, being met with defensiveness, they're being met with validation.
Oh, I love that. I've never heard it put in that perspective, but you've got to deal with one or the other, right? So
Yeah. You're going to
what
have bad behaviors. If I'm telling you over and over and over that I'm overwhelmed
Mhm.
and that I have too much work, and you placate me, you pacify me, you don't attend to my feelings, you don't validate, you don't coach me to figure out some new solutions, you're going to deal with my bad behavior. I'm going to get resentful. I might quit. I might leave your team. So I think going back to that question of the healthy work environment, it has to start. Any person who comes to you with an issue or in a problem, validate, yes, you are disappointed. Yes, you are frustrated. Yes, you are overwhelmed. And just making sure that we validate people's experiences. We don't discount them.
I absolutely love that. That was such an unlock for me working with you, Suzy, was um, really going into difficult conversations with, well, first of all, just going into them, period, right? Like not being afraid of challenging conversations because you helped give me the tools to be able to feel confident and prepared for those
Mhm.
difficult conversations, right? I think also what I'm hearing from you too in this regard is like, you're going to have to choose your hard, right? Like every good leader, like you have two choices in front of you. Like they're usually going to be difficult choices, or there are pros to cons to everything. Just which one do you decide to go through at this moment? Which one's the best decision? And I remember listening to a podcast, I think it was Diary of a CEO, where Stephen Bartlett was talking about an interview that he had read. I think it was with former President Barack Obama, talking about decisions being like doors. Can you walk back through
Mhm.
that door or not? Right. And I think we put so much pressure on, like, oh, should I do it? Should I not? And sometimes we just have to kind of rip off the band-aid maybe, and have that hard conversation, because again, it gets a lot more stressful sometimes to think about, what could be on the other side, just in terms of, the on the flip side, the other hard, so to speak, right? Bad
Mhm.
behavior or alleviating a little bit of the work on your colleagues. Like
Totally.
it's a tough nut to crack for sure.
Well, and Brené also says, I told you she's embedded in me. Um, you can choose courage or comfort, but
Ooh.
you can't have both.
Mm.
So the courageous conversation, attending to people's feelings, that's all courage. It's not comfortable. If you come to me with an issue that you're having with me and you're feeling frustrated, I can be courageous and I can validate and I can listen, or I can be comfortable and avoid that conversation. And, courage or comfort.
Oh my gosh, totally. I don't know many people that would love to raise their hands and squeal like, I am so comfortable. But I know
Mhm.
many who would love to say, I am absolutely courageous, right? Like that is a skill
Yeah.
we need to have and a muscle we need to build. So thank you for that. I feel like I just, how much do I owe you? I feel like I just got myself another incredible coaching session. Suzy, where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about you or working with you?
Yeah, probably the easiest way is LinkedIn. You'll share my name. And I also have my website, Suzy Benson Coaching. And I'm on Instagram, Suzy Benson Coaching also.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure, and really appreciate you spending time and sharing these incredible insights with us.
You are so welcome. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode deposited some useful advice and insights to help you grow your wealth. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future conversations. You can find more resources, episode details, and updates at growyourwealthpodcast.com. And let's keep the conversation going on Instagram. Follow me at Grow Your Wealth Podcast. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or takeaway from today's show. Until next time, remember, burnout is optional. Take care, and I'll see you next week.